The last time we did a review of a web series with Red vs. Blue, so now we're going to be doing something a little different for the Blockbusters show, in that I'm going to be doing a game review. In this case, we're going to be reviewing the game Justice League Task Force for the Sega Genesis. I've technically done a couple of game reviews for Blockbusters show before, but most of them were games that were more like movies than games. Stuff like Night Trap and Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. By the way, even though I talked about it in a previous video, people are pointing out that there is a Plumbers Don't Wear Ties remastered coming out soon. Believe me, the last time I went to GameStop, I checked to see if they had it because I just wanted to laugh to see if it was real. But, so far they don't have it yet. If it does come out, I would love to get a copy of it just to be like, yeah, fuck it, why not? This is the first time I'm going to do a review of a game as a game, not review it as like a movie with a plot and story. Besides, this is a fighting game, and for the most part, fighting games aren't really known for intricate stories. I mean, yeah, sure, they have story modes, and this game does as well, but yeah, this was clearly made at a time when everyone was trying to copy the success of Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. They were the new hot fighting games that revolutionized the genre, and this was just one of the many lame cash-ins to try and appeal to the fighting game crowd. And even though I've read some reviews that said this was the worst fighting game ever made, or one of the worst fighting games ever made, I don't know if I can go that far. It's not very good, but I don't know if I can go that far. Especially considering that this is a thing that exists. I did play this as an alternative to the review, but really, there's not a whole lot to say about Shaq Fu. I mean, yeah, it's a dumb premise for a game. It's a fighting game where you play as Shaq, and you go up against a bunch of weird bad guys, like a bunch of like ancient martial arts kind of cliched bad guys. We'll take some solace in the fact that apparently Shaq admitted that he hates this game too.
Why am I making another Shaq Fu? Alright, I admit, the first Shaq Fu was terrible.
Yes, I know there is a sequel to this game that came out years ago. I am curious to see how that turned out. Hopefully it was better than this one was. I will say though, playing this with some friends was probably some of the funniest shit we've seen in a while. Because just the fact that it's a fighting game that has Shaq in it, and the fact that this is a real game, it was kind of funny. Didn't stop the fact the game sucks, but you know, it was just a little bit funny. It was like the novelty of it. Oh my god, I totally forgot about this. Electronic Arts made this game. EA was responsible for Shaq Fu. So no wonder it sucks. Justice League Task Force, it's a fighting game, and like I said, most of the time fighting games aren't really known for story, they're known for having gameplay, and you know, if the fighting mechanics, if the special moves, if the controls aren't too bad, that's what makes a good fighting game. Every once in a while, it is a nice bonus to have a fighting game that has a good story behind it. And even though you're following an iconic group like the Justice League in this game, the story itself, not too terribly interesting. Even when you do the two-player mode, it really doesn't add much to the game. The story is exactly the same. The story itself is, well, whenever you select your specific Justice League member to play as, you're supposed to be fighting against the other members of the Justice League, which at first I thought was weird, but then they finally explain it halfway through the game. They're evil robot duplicates that were made by a random assortment of DC villains who they were able to round up for this game. I will say one of the more memorable things about the game is the opening, because, I mean, just look at it.
You will never defeat me. I control the technology. I have the power to control your mind.
I would argue this game is made for children, so the fact that they put that as the very first thing you see as soon as you put in the cartridge, it's a little fucking scary, not gonna lie. So as for the gameplay, yeah, you basically just play as one of the members of the Justice League, and at first you think you're fighting other members, which is weird. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And then halfway through it, they pull the rug out from under you. It's like, oh, these aren't the real Justice League members. You have to fight the bad guys now. You got to go fight Cheetah, and then eventually you work your way up to, you know, the big bad. Now for me, a good fighting game should have good controls and a good assortment of moves for your character that you're playing as. And considering you're playing as members of the Justice League, you should have a lot of good attacks on your side, but really, you're not given a whole lot. I mean, they do have different things that you can do. Like if you're Batman, you have the ability to throw some stuff around. They do give you different abilities. Wonder Woman has her lasso. Aquaman has his trident. They do give you a couple of items you can use, and there are a few attacks, but it's one of those games where the enemies that you have to fight against are way too OP. I mean, seriously, these characters can just fucking touch you, and like, more than half your life bar goes down. It's not fucking fair. As for the controls, really, you're just gonna be button mashing the whole time. This game really doesn't have a whole lot of like special kind of moves when it comes to the controls. It's just a lot of button mashing, and if you button mash enough, you're pretty much gonna take them out as long as you can get close enough to the enemies. Thankfully though, the game is pretty easy, so even if you lose half your life, reset you should be able to get the hang of it pretty fast. And the game's also not too terribly long. Like, I was able to beat the whole thing in less than a half hour. So for what it's worth, it is a playable game, but it's just that the things that weigh it down, like the gameplay itself and the fact that it ranges on being too easy, and also the characters are just way too OP. Like, there are several times where they take out half your life bar and it's like, alright, fuck off. You want a fighting game to give you a good challenge, but you don't want it to be like way too simple on either party. You want it to be an even playing field so that even when you're going up against the NPCs, it feels like you're able to fight the character, but they can still hold their own, so that it's not too easy. But at the same time, you also don't want the characters to be too difficult, so that just, oh, 1 or 2 hits and you're fucking down. That's not right. To me, Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat were like the perfect example of how to do this kind of thing right, and there's a reason that games like that were flourishing in the 90s. But after they came out and became really popular, they obviously set this precedent that, oh, people want to play fighting games, and some of them were good, and then you got shit like this and Shaq Fu, which were just incredibly lackluster. Shaq Fu was clearly relying on the, oh, look, it's based on a famous icon like Shaquille O'Neal, and this one's appeal was, oh, it's based on the Justice League. And while you could totally make a good Justice League or DC Comics related fighting game, this isn't one of them. For the graphics, I'm not going to harp on this too much because I'm a sucker for 16-bit games. I really like a lot of stuff on Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, but I don't know, something about the designs in this game don't feel right. For the most part, the designs don't look too bad. Like, the villains, I actually liked a lot of the detail they put into the villain designs for the game. But, like, some of the Justice League members, like, okay, the Flash looks pretty good, Batman looks pretty good, and Wonder Woman, I would say, looks pretty good. The two that stick out to me the most, definitely Aquaman and Superman. For some reason, they're drawn with mullets. I mean, I get it. It was 1995. The mullet was a big thing. I'm assuming that Billy Ray Cyrus's achy breaky heart was around and the mullet was making a comeback. But even still, like, granted, I haven't read every single comic that was made in 1995 or before then, but still, why, in fairness, Aquaman doesn't look too bad with it. I mean, like, there are various versions of Aquaman that came out way later where he has longer hair, and it's like, okay, that actually does look a little bit better on him. Superman with a mullet. It's just, oh god, just, I don't know. It doesn't look right to me. I don't know. There really isn't a whole lot to this game. Like, even the plot itself, Like even when you're curious, because I was curious when I saw screen grabs, I'm like, wait, it's a fighting game where you're the Justice League fighting against other members? What the hell? And then halfway through, the twist, as it were, it's like, oh, we're fighting evil robot duplicates made by the villains in the DC universe. Okay, cool. I will say the second half of the game is a little bit more interesting than the first half because you have to go up against the villains, and you know, some of the different location designs for the villains is neat. You think that as the game progresses the difficulty would get harder, like, oh, now you're going up against the real bad guys. You're no longer fighting your who you think are supposed to be your fellow Justice League members. Now you're fighting against the bad guys. No, like even the boss level at the end, the boss fight isn't even that hard. Didn't feel like there was a progression of difficulty as the game goes on. It feels like the game, even when you're supposed to be at the big bad final boss fight, there's not really a whole lot to it. Controls mostly just come down to button mashing. The graphics, for the most part, look okay for a 16-bit game, but man, fucking some of those character designs didn't look right. Difficulty level, the game is mostly pretty easy. I mean, I was able to beat it in, I don't know, 25 minutes. Like, it really isn't that hard of a game. And the story itself is really nothing special. I mean, it is kind of interesting why you're fighting other Justice League members, but then halfway through, the grand reveal of, oh, it was a big plot created by some of the well-known villains in the DCU. It's just like, all right, whatever. And you think that maybe if the game started getting more difficult, like, oh yeah, now we're going up against the bad guys. No, it doesn't. The entire game is just mostly pretty easy, pretty standard. A lot of the time it just comes down to button mashing, and the difficulty, the characters you fight against are just way too powerful, and they take you out in like 2 hits. And even when you get the hang of it, you know, it's pretty much the same way. They go down with like 2 or 3 hits each. It's not that difficult. Advice, if you want a good fighting game from the 90s, obviously just stick with Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat. Those are some good fighting games from the 90s. I'd highly recommend those. This game right here, not the biggest disservice to the Justice League. I mean, there's plenty of worse Justice League media out there. Obviously, the theatrical cut of the Justice League comes to mind. Snyder Cut, while incredibly long, is, I don't know, I don't think that bad. You can clearly tell there was some vision behind it. That's coming from someone that's not the world's biggest Zack Snyder fan either, but, you know, for a 4-hour movie, there was at least more passion put into it than the theatrical version, which just felt like the most lifeless thing. But in comparison, this game, I mean, yeah, it's clearly just a cash-in on fighting games, and oh, look, it's got the Justice League. You guys like the Justice League? They're pretty cool, right? But, I mean, not a good game, but it's also not the worst fighting game out there. I'd say Shaq Fu is a little bit worse. But Shaq Fu also has the benefit of being funny because of how bad it is. I mean, I was able to play both these games, that's one thing. I mean, there are some games that are so bad they're just not playable. I was able to play both these games, but yeah, Shaq Fu I would say is way worse than this. So this is easily one of the worst fighting games. And the only reason that it's entertaining is just because of how novel the concept is. It's a fighting game where you're playing as Shaq. So it has that going for it, but I mean, I've seen Kazam. That doesn't make the game any good. Yeah, I think that's all that needs to be said about these two games. Tune in next time to the Blockbuster show for the final video for this month, and we're going to be talking about a book that was written by a YouTuber that I used to watch the shit out of in high school. I'm not going to spoil who it is. You can have fun guessing in the comments, but until next time, guys, I'm Am Sykes of the Blockbuster show, and we will see you guys in the next video.